There are some significant influences that were already significantly impressed upon me by the time I encountered capoeira. I had already been heavily influenced by the philosophy of Miyamoto Musashi and Bruce Lee, which the similarities or the crossover between their two philosophies that is simplest for me to implement is that they were mavericks. They stood out. They were on the frontier, the cutting edge. They pioneered things differently. Now, whether or not anyone believes the stories about either of these figures, Miyamoto Musashi is said to have been in 66 duels with sword. So he's been in sword fights, 66 of them, and won all of them. That means that these are fights to the death. And he was on the winning side, the winning military of a war in Japan. And he also developed a single grip, two-sword style of what some people might call kendo, with the Japanese sword fighting system, which is usually two hands, one sword. He used a single hand on two different swords, so one sword in the left and one in the right, which was different than a lot of other traditional katana and kendo sword fighting styles in Japan. And of course, Lee Jun-fan, aka Bruce Lee, developed Jeet Kune Do, or the way of the intercepting fist, heavily influenced by a lot of things in Chinese martial arts, but specifically Wing Chun, and his teacher for a short time, who was the famous Ip Man. And again, there are legends and myths about them, and who knows what exactly is true. The point is that the stories do not have to be true in order to significantly influence and have an impact on someone so that they go ahead and do their best to live their lives according to those philosophies and to match those stories. And so an example from the personal development industry is the book Think and Grow Rich with Napoleon Hill, who evidence has come out that Napoleon Hill was violent to his partners, his wife, at least one, was abusive, was kind of out of control, was also a con man. And one woman that he married, he convinced her to write a book, but she made a deal with him and said if he gives her the rights to the book, she wrote a book for him. So, which came out to be Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And whether or not that's true or not, it's interesting because he died alone and penniless, while a man named W. Clement Stone, who read his book and was inspired by it, became enormously rich. I think the numbers were something like 100 million way back in, the 50s or 60s, something like that. I'm not sure exactly the timeline. But you'll even hear people like Dan Kennedy talk about how that was the state of Napoleon Hill, and it's interesting that someone else could read their book and be inspired and influenced by it to go ahead and do even better than the author. And that's the point. And I'm not, again, I have no way of confirming or denying the stories, the myths, the legends about Bruce Lee or Miyamoto Musashi, just that I've been heavily impacted by them. the improvisation and the innovation that they applied and that they asserted over the systems that they learned. And so by the time I encountered capoeira, I had already been influenced by those thinkers, as well as having been in lots of street brawls and had a reputation for, even though I was the skinny kid with thick glasses, that when someone bullied me, it happened only once. And so I was about 15 when I first encountered capoeira. And a friend, Jose, who was actually a friend of my younger brother, Jamal's, called and asked Jamal to go with him to this demonstration and exhibition of capoeira at the Broward County Center for Performing Arts, or the Broward Center for Performing Arts in Broward County in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And my brother wasn't into it, but he knew that I was, so I ended up going with Jose. I think his father dropped us off there. And I was immediately awestruck by what I saw. And it was put on by Mestre Gelon Vieira, who is, for one thing, known for being one of the first capoeira mestres to bring capoeira to the United States. He might have arrived in 1974 and started teaching in 1975, dance capoeira, Capoeira Brazil. And so, also very shortly after that, I then saw the 1993 movie Only the Strong. But in between that, by the way, though, is that I saw that demonstration, and then I dropped out of high school and went to California, saw gangster rap and real gangs and crazy stuff in Compton and South Central and all kind of things in California, and ended up being in a psychiatric facility for 60 days where I had my 16th birthday, and then went back to Florida, where I eventually found a capoeira instructor. While I was riding my bike down the street, I saw a place called Brazilian Tropicana, where they had a capoeira show mixed in with another Brazilian dance show on Saturday night, I think on weekends, Friday and Saturday. And there was a flyer for capoeira. It was for Mestre Pelé, aka Djalma Pereira, from Corpo e Movimento, who I think his mestre was called Mestre Angola, and his brother Sula, who then became, it was Professor Sula, then Contramestre Sula, then he's Mestre Sula now, I believe. And so all of that, I practiced a little capoeira on my own when I was in California. From what I knew, I got the little capoeira book by Nestor Capoeira, which had Bimba's sequences in it, and Mestre Bimba was one of the very two famous mestres who innovated capoeira in Brazil. Mestre Bimba was the one who created capoeira regional, or regional capoeira, and Mestre Pastinha preserved, so it said, the more traditional type of capoeira, which is capoeira Angola. But in that book, there was not much ado about combat effectiveness, except it showed these sequences that were supposed to help with combat. It was a lot of, again, a philosophical book, but it did show practical techniques. But then I saw the movie Only the Strong, where it was used in fighting and fight scenes in a very spectacular way. And so my early influence with capoeira was as someone who was also already heavily influenced by an ancient swordsman who killed people in battle and innovated a style and didn't follow, the path of other sword fighters, samurai, etc., and a celebrity, an actor from Hollywood, martial artist who had a somewhat of a bad boy reputation for winning fights and also deviating from his teachings in Wing Chun and other martial arts from China and creating his way of the intercepting fist, Jeet Kune Do, and writing several books about it, including the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, which I read, and also the Bruce Lee's method, the Jeet Kune Do method. I think it's called Bruce Lee's fighting method or something like that. There was like a whole series of books, these little booklets. And then also very, very, so many things happened. I met a kickboxing instructor named J.K. Vitro, who had these two fighters that left an impression on me. One was Jason Camacho, the other one was Mike May, who also had the ring name Mayday. And, J.K. Master V, aka J.K. Vitro, he was from New York. And then I also got involved with the Broward Sheriff's Office Police Athletic League, where they had American kickboxing. And, American kickboxing is very interesting, too, because I had, at that time, also been a huge fan of Mike Tyson. And so I was mimicking a lot of Mike Tyson's movements, and I developed a very heavy punching style, as well as being influenced by Benny the Jet Urquidez, who I'm thankful I actually met him once in California. And he's an undefeated kickboxer and was just an amazing fighter. And, and so American kickboxing at that time was basically, it was a lot like Western boxing. It was punching heavy, which is different from what people call Thai kickboxing or Thai boxing, which is Muay Thai, which relies a lot on knees, roundhouse kicks to the leg, elbows, things like that, clinching and throwing from the clinch, where American kickboxing had more Western boxing rules, so it was very punch heavy, but also, had a lot of kicks. But the thing about it was that it didn't incorporate belts like many martial arts did. It was like Muay Thai and boxing in the way that it was just you trained to fight. Although J.K. Vitro's school, he did make use of belts. And it kind of felt like what was interesting is that Master V's school reminded me of a blend of both Miyagi-Do and Cobra Kai. It was very interesting. But, those guys, Camacho and Mike May, and just the environment, the atmosphere, it was like going to a boxing gym, but it was kickboxing. It was just very interesting. So all that to say, these are all the influences that were going on at the time. And then a friend, Diego, who introduced me to Shotokan Karate, which is also a very hard style of karate. And I had, again, already been influenced by, because that was the style of karate that Ken and Ryu did in the Street Fighter game, and it also seemed very combative. So, growing up, and I had first been introduced to that game very long time ago, before I was even 13 years old, because that's when I left New York. And I remember that at the corner store, at one of the bodegas, they had an arcade of Street Fighter. And I remember seeing Ken and Ryu and their Shotokan style, and it was just this very straight, style. And I learned a lot about round kicks and straight kicks and just the power punching style and the things they were doing in there. And it was interesting because even for a video game, the moves were pretty straightforward because of the fact, I guess it was the graphics at the time, but it made a lot of sense what I was seeing. Again, I could go on and on. There's so many influences. The fact that I would go around to different martial arts schools and take them up on their introductory classes and train with them. And, but it was because I wanted to fight. I wanted to be a fighter. It was one of the things about me was that if I had an insecurity or I felt that I wasn't good at something, I just went and found as many ways as I possibly could. And because I didn't have resources, I had no money on a budget. I was young, and I, wasn't really, I did have my first job when I was 15 at a Dunkin' Donuts for 3 months, and I did work here and there at different places. But I just didn't have as many resources to consistently go to classes. So I did a lot of training on my own. I would do training. I made my own weapons like nunchaku. My parents, for some reason, let me buy throwing stars and shurikens from the little Asian shops that we'd find in downtown New York and other places. And so, we always had big backyards where I'd be running around there all day long and just doing all kinds of, pretending I was a ninja and stuff. So, but it was all focused on how can I be a better and real fighter, but also with a very, very heavy leaning towards the fantasy, because I didn't really know what martial arts were, like all of that ninja magic stuff and all of the mythology behind martial arts. I was heavily embedded in that. I was trying to figure out how to master chi and become like this, these warriors who could fight without seeing, and people would come up to them and they'd be throwing all these attacks at them and they'd be blocking with one hand, sort of like how you saw Neo in the Matrix, and all those myths and legends. But I very quickly learned that that was myth, because of being in police athletic leagues and kickboxing gyms, and just seeing places that didn't have belts, and it wasn't just doing fancy moves and kicking around for no reason, like things that were like hard styles where you had to have headgear, mouthpiece, and gloves on. You learn very quick, okay, this is not what you think it is. You're not just going to do some moves and take people out just because you know something that they don't. But in a way that is, though, like if you're a trained martial artist and some people on the street that attack you don't know, there's a good chance, especially if you're ferocious, because that's one advantage that a lot of crazy people who want to fight you on the street, or who've got some issues, for whatever reason they are messing with people on the street, they usually have that advantage because they're just kind of rage monsters. But but I had already known from people trying to pick on me or bully me that fighting is fighting. And plus I had all kinds of experiences. Like I remember once some guys followed me home on my bike. They had bikes too, because I was about to cross the street and a car turned a corner and I had to stop really fast and slid and fell. And so these guys were like laughing at me, and I flicked them off, and and then there were like 5 or 6 of them, but only 2 of them broke off of their pack and chased me because they had bicycles. They cornered me in the parking lot of the apartment we lived in Oakland Park, and they got off the bike and they started coming at me, and then I just stopped. I put the bike down and I was like ready to take them on, and then my dad happened to be sitting up on the balcony at the top, and he was smoking a cigarette, and he came down and he's like, if you don't jump, he's like, no, you don't jump in, it's one-on-one. If you jump in, he's like, I'm gonna get your ass, or something like that. His thick Trinidadian accent. And so I had a good old street fight in the yard that ended with me having this kid pinned on the ground under my knee, with my knee on his neck and his head. And I was like, and my dad was like, you had enough, and the kid was like, yeah, and he quit. He basically tapped out. He submitted, because I wasn't getting up. And my dad had to say, okay, let him up. And then he said something like, I remember my dad said, my son ain't no joke. He said something like that. It was pretty funny. But that, I grew up with crazy stuff like that. All right, I gotta make a drop real quick, and I'm gonna continue this. But that all is building up. This is 20 minutes of me talking about how, and there's a good reason for this, about my approach to capoeira, which eventually became capoeira. And so this is a good segue here, that I was heavily influenced by street fighting and combat effectiveness by the time I had encountered capoeira. All right, so I've established that, enough. And, I really have to give props to Mestre Pelé because he put up with a lot of crap from me because I was scrappy and I wanted to fight. But, you know, I remember many years later he said something to me that was really interesting, where he says, "Okay, Mordecai," because that was the name that I started using, was Mordecai. And it was also the stage name for the death metal band I eventually got into, called Acrimonium. But he says, I remember one day he said to me, "Okay, Mordecai, you can fight, but can you play capoeira?" And, you know, and that's a huge influence on me, because I started to realize, yeah, there's definitely a difference in playing capoeira and fighting. And, you know, I remember also there was a park off of Sunrise Boulevard and near Andrews Avenue, and there's some churches around there in Fort Lauderdale. And I remember I was out there, and this Haitian kid, you know, I was doing some moves, and Jose and I were out there. And anyway, the kid and I squared off to spar in the park, and, you know, a couple minutes in, and he landed a kick right to my solar plexus, and I buckled over and fell down. I was like, oh man. I was like, holy crap. I mean, I really learned about that. I mean, he did a really great, what would probably be called a pontera in capoeira, which is using the ball of the foot right at the big toe to like put a nice sharp kick right to the solar plexus. I mean, it was brutal. It was, you know, a very painful lesson in, you know, facing off against somebody who also knew martial arts. And, you know, Jose and I had our sparring moments, but that was just a very interesting one, having to go against, you know, an unfriendly, even though, I mean, it was, you know, it wasn't malicious, but, you know, he just wasn't gonna, you know, just roll over. And, you know, he wasn't gonna play fair. I mean, we were kids, and, you know, especially young men with the testosterone and that ego, you know. And yeah, so he landed that kick. That was a lesson in solar plexus, how sensitive that spot really is. And so things like that. And I learned, you know, about stuff like the solar plexus and the temples and the chin, and how there were, in fact, certain parts of the body that were more sensitive to causing a person causing a KO, basically, a knockout. Which, you know, if you hit somebody with certain shots, body shots in a boxing ring, you know, liver shots, solar plexus shots, you know, that makes them buckle over so they can't continue. That's considered a KO or a knockout, just as much as if you catch them in the right place of the chin or the temple, you know, to knock them out and they go unconscious, you know, they're considered knockouts because they can't continue. So all of that is when I entered into capoeira. And, you know, I was in some ways not really, I mean, I didn't really know better. A lot of things I've had to do has just been teaching myself, and a lot of times things weren't also made very clear to me. But I was kind of disappointed because capoeira, we were only doing the dance and the game part and all these rituals, and even though it was fun, and even though the way Mestre Pelé played, it was more like how it was exactly actually how I play the game now, and how I would share it with my team. But I was more into, I didn't realize what was going on, and I wasn't, you know, asking enough questions. I wasn't aware enough, and I wanted combat. So I would actually go to a lot of different capoeira schools. There was Capoeira Explosion, which was also a pair of brothers, Kleber and Cajinho. And I eventually met Caboquinho down in Miami, who was an Angolero, Capoeira Angola. I mean, I met so many instructors. And interesting enough, when I didn't even know it when I saw the movie Only the Strong, but a bunch of guys that I met, eventually in capoeira, going from Florida to California, and even I met somebody recently in China, well, more recently than, you know, the guys I met before. But a lot of them were in that movie Only the Strong, in the beginning and closing scene. And there's Amen Joselito Santos. There was Mestre Branca. Pele was in there. Who else? And there's a few guys. Who am I'm missing? Well, it doesn't matter. But there is there are a lot of connected schools, and I went around, and then I finally was told by Pele that you got to be careful because sometimes other capoeira schools might not have good intention if you're not there with your mestre. Nothing ever happened to me. I was also, again, not a person that people bullied, and when I came back from California, I had started lifting weights and working out, and so I was, even though I was still thin, I was pretty muscular, and I had more like a physique, more like Bruce Lee than Bolo Young, more like, a lot less than those muscular types. Like, you look at Scott Adkins or Michael Jai White, I wasn't like that. I don't think I've ever been like that. I mean, I've been pretty ripped, but I don't think I've been that ripped and that big. But I've just also never worked out like that. I wouldn't even know how. I mean, I think that's just crazy to me. Those people are super dedicated, especially how muscular Michael Jai White and Scott Adkins are and how agile they are. It's amazing. So, but over time, and having played with and interacted with many different capoeira schools, I eventually formulated my own philosophy of capoeira, which eventually became capoeira. And because I, first of all, decided to be very clear, and I decided to become very clear about communicating the distinctions that I saw in capoeira being a dance, a game, and a martial art at the same time, which I felt was not always as clearly expressed and delineated as it could be. And so, I remember there was a time when I had 52 fights at this amateur tough man MMA event that a guy named Wally Smavjir, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, but he had an event or a promotion company called Off the Wall Promotions, and he had an event called Monday Night Raw that was every Monday night, when they also had wrestling on. That was Monday Night Raw, and it was they had an event there called Hardcore King of the Ring. Also, none of these names original, but Hardcore King of the Ring was 1 round, 10-minute time limit, and it had a combination of boxing and wrestling, and you could do submissions. You could do arm bars, leg locks. The only ones I really did were rear naked chokes and guillotines. One of my wrestling coaches, when I was a senior in high school, taught me a guillotine. And then they had a straight boxing event. And the boxing was 3 2-minute rounds with a 1-minute break in between. And I didn't really do very many of those. I did some of them. I did enough. And it was there that I met a boxing coach. I lived with him for 6 months. His name was Jazzy J. Flowers, or also known as Tiger. Journeyman fighter. He had 6 pro fights. I don't know how many he won. I don't remember at this time, but he taught me a lot of really good stuff, and it helped me to become a better boxer, which I then incorporated into my fighting style. And so, combining capoeira with the throws and takedowns that I knew from wrestling and the things I began to learn from Muay Thai and just picking up things here and there. It's first, I started calling it Cap Thai Kido, spelled CAPTHAIKIDO, which was a combination of capoeira, Muay Thai, and Aikido. And I only started doing that because these guys that were Little Jimmy and some of the other guys from this band called Brutal Mastication, they were doing this thing called Cap Takido, KAPTHAKIDO, which was, capoeira, Muay Thai, and Aikido, but they just, for some reason, whoever the guy was teaching it spelled it that way. And these were guys from like this hardcore death metal band, and But that's where I picked it up, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, and that's close to what I do. And so I did a lot of deep research into Aikido, and I learned, I read books about Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, and I learned, sometimes called the gentleman's art, and Steven Seagal did it. And then I was also very heavily influenced by the way that Steven Seagal did it in the movies, which I didn't know, of course, was so much different than how it was actually practiced. And, one of the reasons why a lot of people tend to make fun of Aikido and say it's not practical, in a lot of same ways that people say that about Capoeira. Capoeira, you see it, clowned a lot, and it's interesting. But then you have, like, for example, there's a guy I met in California who played Eddie Gordo in the Tekken movie, and he was also in Ong Bak with Tony Jaa, and he, his name is Lateef Crowder, and I met him at he was coming out of the gym that he worked out in it was off of Ventura Boulevard at the mall there. I forget what it is right now. I think off of Sepulveda. Anyway, and but the way that he presented it in Tekken and he had a really great fight scene with Tony Jaa in Ong Bak. I don't know if it was Ong Bak or it was The Protector. Either one, it was a Tony Jaa movie. It was a great fight scene. He was like one of the ending bosses. And then, which is very Game of Death. That movie from Bruce Lee. Just that whole sequence where, like, a lot of video games do that too. Where you got to get through each level, and there's like a final boss at the end of each stage. And so, and then also, gosh, I'm not remembering his name, but there was also a movie where there was a capoeira fighter and he was one of the guys who was in Only the Strong. I don't know why I'm not remembering his name right now, but he also did a pretty good representation of capoeira. And there was also a movie called Rooftops that had some interesting capoeira scenes as well. But yeah, it's clowned a lot like Aikido, but I really feel like it's because, so I wrote an article that was picked up by a capoeira magazine that unfortunately is no longer online. I think it was called, I don't know if it was, no, it wasn't, I forget what it was called. But I wrote an article called Capoeira Contemporánea, and something about salvaging combat effectiveness from a badly organized circus, because I felt like that's what it was. And then I got burned by a couple of people from this group called Capoeira Brazil, where so I started working at this gym. I mean, this is many years later. This is so crazy because I've been doing capoeira for a long time, since 1992. So years later, I met this guy named Sean. He was in Capoeira Brazil, and I had by this time started working at this place called Bodies in Motion, and there were these boxing triplets, these three professional fighters who happened to be triplets, Floyd Troy and Lloyd Weaver. And Floyd had a professional boxing match coming up at the Burbank Airport Hilton, and I had called. He gave me the number of the fight promoter to get tickets directly from him. So I called him up. I don't know if they got some kickback. I don't know what the reason was why I was even calling directly the promoter to get tickets, than not getting it from like Ticketmaster or whatever. But either way, I called the promoter and I said, oh yeah, I work with Floyd and I want to get some tickets. And we talked for a little while, and it came out that that I kickbox and did some martial arts too. And he said, oh yeah, da da da. And so then I arranged to get the tickets, and he told me the price or whatever, and I was going to pick him up when I got there. But then sometime later, I don't know if it was a week or so later, he called me up and he had this scenario. He said, look, something about the boxing commission and how they needed a certain number of rounds, and if they didn't have a certain amount of rounds, not fights, but just a certain number of rounds, then the whole event would be canceled. And if I would be willing to put on a kickboxing exhibition, make it look real, but put on a kickboxing exhibition, we would know it was an exhibition, But just to make sure they had enough rounds, we would do a 5-rounder, because too many fights had dropped out or something, whatever happened. And I said, yeah. And I called so many people and nobody was up for it. And so the fight promoter said, look, I'll pay you $800. And as you can split it with the guy 50-50, you can take $600 to give him $200. Like, it's up to you, but I'm giving you the $800. You do with it what you will. And I thought that was great. I was like, great, $800 for me to do a 5-round exhibition kickboxing match with somebody that I can choose. And so I called this guy, Sean, from Capoeira, Brazil. And the arrangement I made was, look, I'm going to, give you $400 and I'm going to donate $300 to the fund that Capoeira Brazil has. Their teacher was this Mestre Boneco, this fund that they have, because there was a program where they would give it to some disadvantaged youth, or it was like sort of a scholarship where people didn't have money, they could have some of their classes paid for. Anyway, we do this match, and I remember very clearly during the match, we were in a clinch, and I was like, hey man, you gotta pick up the pace a little bit, make this look good. And then there was another point a little bit later, he was like, hey man, take it easy. And then he was doing all this stuff and he was basically one-upping me in the match when I was like, when he told me to take it easy, and then he took advantage of that. And then went around telling everybody that he beat me in a kickboxing match when it was an exhibition, and I had to tell him to pick up the pace. And then he had to use trickery to gain the superficial victory from the match. And then there were these online forums, and it was run by his girlfriend, or fiance, who's now his wife. And I remember some of my students, because I had started teaching people on my own, had found the forum, and they spilled the beans. Like, no, there was an exhibition, and he paid him and donated $300 to the fund, and then all of a sudden it got taken down. Jessica took it down, his girlfriend, wife, and was like, oh no, we don't need to be talking about this stuff, and everybody calm down, And what I'm guessing, I have no proof of this, but I'm guessing that they probably just took all the $700 for themselves and never gave it to the fund. And because if they were already telling stories about how he beat me in a kickboxing match, then who knows what the hell, was going on there. And then years later, I started training with another guy from Capoeira, Brazil. And I told him, yeah, I used to train with them, and And then there was an event, a street event, an exhibition that, I forget, there was some kind of like, festival that they had in California that was all on Ventura Boulevard. And that guy, Sean, showed up, and I was wearing the Capoeira Brazil pins. Like, what are you doing with those? I thought you started your own martial art, and just being a punk. And I was like, and what's really funny about that too is that I had gone to, some years later after that incident, I had a bunch of students, and there were 6 of them, and they were all women. I remember one of them was Erin Fukuda, a couple of her friends, some people that I was teaching capoeira to. I think my friend Amber was there too. And we went to this open roda that Capoeira Brazil had, and I remember I showed up with these people, and they were my students, and they were kind of gracious, and I didn't think there was any beef. I didn't think there was any problem from that incident before, when they were talking all that smack about how he beat me, and then they had to take down the forum because of them saying that he, whatever happened with one of my students. But they were just acting weird. And then I remember there was a point where Jessica, because she was like leading it, I remember she made a point, and she didn't say my name, but she made a point to be like, oh, capoeira is not about this and the tricks and the moves and the da-da-da. It's about the tradition and the lineage, and we have history, or we have I don't know, I forget the word she was using. We have tradition, something like that, or history, or something like that, because the Boneco wasn't in town. And, and I remember my favorite move, which I still do, called the Hora Parafuso, which is a wheel screw, which is this 540 spin through the air. I could do that, and crazy backflips, and I was really fast. And I remember at this point in time, too, I was super fast, because I was experimenting with a vegan diet, and I was like much lighter than I usually am, and I was like lightning fast and like flying through the air. And I remember Sean, that was his name. Shigado means close. We were in the Hora together, and I remember at one point in time, went to go take me down. Like, he was mimicking me and making fun of me in the ring. Like, I would do this one spin on my arm, and then he did one better, because I didn't really do it. I mean, it looks cool when I do it, but the one he did was like crazy. I mean, like he got some cool tricks. And so he was just kind of mimicking stuff that I was doing and showing me up there. And then at one point in time, I did some, I don't know what position I ended up in, but he went for a tesoura, or scissors. And this move, it makes the person who's doing it the way that he did it very, very vulnerable, because my whole thing in my mind was to always never fall on my butt or my back, always to stay on my feet and or my hands, but never lay on your back, right? Never sit down. Your butt never touches the floor. Your back never touches the floor. Those are just rules that I had embedded in me as a capoeira player. So when he went for the tesoura the way he did, I simply turned towards him so that I wouldn't fall and I would land on all fours. But what that did was, because of the way he was moving, it forced him to slam not only on his butt, but his full back. Like, it really slammed his body in the ground and the whole place. Like, everybody was like, oh, because he went for the tesoura, but I just unconsciously completely countered it. I wasn't even thinking. See, I wasn't trying to dump him. I was attempting to just stay on my hands, or stay on my feet and or my hands, as I did. And it just beautifully just dumped him. And, you know, and I think it was after that happened that when Jessica got on the mic and was, or I don't know if there was a mic or if she was just, you know, stopped the game for a little bit after a while and was talking this. And maybe that was like a big embarrassing moment for him, because that's just the way I played. Like, my rules were in my head that's how I was going to play. Like, I'm not going to get sat down or swept. It's just not going to happen. So that was how I played the game. There were only a couple times when I've actually been taken down, and the first time was during my first batizado, and it was by Professor Sula, which was Mestre Pele's brother, and you kind of have to go with that, although he did it really well. And then there was, it was by Sula again. Like, some years later, I was visiting Florida again, and I can't remember when this was, but he had a Young Circle in Hollywood, Florida. He had a capoeira class there, and I went, and we were playing, and he took me down there. And that was it. That's the only times I've ever been taken down in capoeira. Now, I'm not saying that I can't be, or that I'm some really badass, tough capoeira player, just that the way that I move and the things that I do, I completely avoid getting in situations for that happening, because that's how I thought capoeira should be played. So now this has been long enough. I'm here 42 minutes talk. I'm kind of just really just reminiscing about a lot of stuff, but I'm laying the groundwork, because I'm just about to launch a podcast that is exclusively for capoeira, and it's also going to serve as a portal for a monthly membership for people who become students, and also for people who want to donate to the program. And because of the way that my podcast is set up, it makes it really easy for people to do that. So I'm kind of using it as a workaround, kind of hacking the system and using it in a way that it's not necessarily intended, but it just makes it really convenient. And so to wrap this up, though, and I've said this before in a couple of other podcasts that have been put on the Hypno Athletics / Capoeira podcast, but I'm going to remove the Capoeira from the Hypno Athletics podcast and just leave the Hypno Athletics one specifically for Hypno Athletics. And now this is going to be the first podcast for Capoeira that's dedicated to it. And so I've said this before, but now I'm, with all of that and how I said I went into the idea of Capoeira being for combat, for fighting, as a real combat and self-defense system. You know, and I've give little hints about certain things here about how I think the game should be played, why I don't get dropped on my butt or my back, and all those different varying parts. And there's one more really cool story I'll tell that's kind of fun. There's a guy named Bruno. So I remember it was a Hoda that we had between Corpo Movimento and Capoeira Explosion. So it was Pele, his brother Sula, who's now they're both Mestre Pele, Mestre Sula, and it was the brothers Kleber and Cajinho. We went to their academy, which I think was in either Hollywood or Miami, and we had a Hoda. So it was our students went there, their students. Jose was there, a bunch of people, and there was a guy named Macajon, which means macaroni because he had blonde curly hair, so like macaroni. And he and I were playing, and by this time I was already deep also in the video game Tekken 3 with Eddie Gordo. So I was this person who I was learning moves from everywhere, from the little capoeira book, from going to different capoeira classes, from the movie Only the Strong. Like every single input that I could get of capoeira, I was learning from in live games and sessions and Hodas, from books, from movies, from everything. I was just like, if it's being done in capoeira, I want to know it. And there was this one combination that Eddie Gordo did, which was a queixada followed by a rasteira. So that's like an outside crescent kick. Queixada means chin strike, but so it's an outside crescent kick, which I guess is meant to strike the chin for a knockout. And it would be that followed by a sweep. So, for example, if you would turn your body so that your right side was facing the person, you would step in and kick towards them and make an arc towards the person. Your leg would go up and over and out to the right, and then you would continue to follow that momentum going towards the right by sweeping your left leg on the ground towards their legs. And so I remember seeing that move in Tekken 3, and I played that game a lot. I was obsessed because they had a character that was doing capoeira in there, which I met Mestre Marcelo in China for the first time, which I actually got my very first cord at a batizado. They gave me a green cord at the batizado. I didn't even know. It was a surprise. And it was Mestre Marcelo who did the mocap, or the motion capture, for the character Eddie Gordo in the video game. Anyway, like I said, capoeira, the community is very close-knit. A lot of people know everybody. It's not, it's like the heavy metal community, or how it used to be, at least when I started. And so we're playing, and I did this move, and I used the queixada as a fake, and then I went straight into the rasteira, and I didn't really think anything of it, but he fell hard, and everybody, like in his camp, like I think his mestres did. I don't know if that was like the most mature thing to do. I don't remember who, but people were like, "Ooh," and like he was embarrassed because he had a higher cord. I think at the time as well, he was like a yellow cord, or at least some high. I didn't have any. I didn't have any cord out. I didn't go to that many classes. Mr. Pele was letting me train for free, so I would go whenever I could. I was, and so. By this time, though, this was some years later. By this time, because you remember, I found Pele in like 93 or 94 is when we started training with him. When I found the flyer at Brazilian Tropicana, could have been 94. Because again, September I had my 16th birthday of 93. So yeah, it was definitely 94 when I went back to Florida. So Mestre Pele, so that was in 94. Like I said, 92 I first went to the Gelon Vieira's exhibition demonstration and like little mini class at workshop at the Broward Center for Performing Arts. 93, I dropped out of high school, went to California, came back, found the flyer for the school for Pele at the Brazilian Tropicana. Then we finally started training with him, and so years later I started working at this place called Club Atlantis, where they had that event, the Hardcore King of the Ring, the Monday Night Raw, the one that I said, they had the 1 round 10-minute time limit combination of boxing and submission wrestling, and the boxing event. And so this happened, and I remember that they had gotten wind that I was, this is 1999 when I first started, at the end of 1999, maybe early 2000, that I was fighting there. So Macajon brought this guy named Bruno, and he was kind of like a Bruno. He was like this brutish, like he had a hairy chest, bald head, kind of muscular. He looked thick. He looked pretty, built up. I mean, he looked solid. He looked like a solid dude, this Bruno. And so they came out, and, you know, you could do challenges. You could challenge somebody. And so, you know, I was like, yeah, if you want to fight me, you can do that directly. And, you know, so we went up to Wally, and we're like, yeah, we can definitely pair you guys up. We can have a special, you know, grudge match. So I got to, you know, when it was our turn, we got up. He was wearing capoeira pants, interestingly enough. I don't know if he was a capoeira fighter. But we got into the ring, bell rang, and literally within it was like one of the fastest fights I've ever had. I pulled like one of these things. Remember, I've always been a big fan of Mike Tyson, and I dropped down low, went in, I did a right hand, blam, right to his body, and then his hands dropped down, and I went straight up with a right hook to his face, blam, and knocked him out like within seconds. And it was one of the fastest knockouts. And, you know, again, Macajon, who bought him there, it was embarrassing. You know, I knocked his thug, Bruno, out in just a matter of moments. And the thing is that we got, at the time, VHS tapes that we add to our collection. I still have all 52 of mine in a storage unit. And there's a video online called Capoeira, the beginning, and from 1999 to 2001. And it's a highlight reel of those fights on there, of me knocking people around in the ring, wearing leather pants and chains on my waist and all kind of, it was just crazy. And so, and for some reason, Jose said that Mr. Pele and somebody else, they wanted to borrow the tape. So I gave it to him. I never saw it again. It disappeared. I don't know if it was like an embarrassment that happened to Bruno. And I think he was actually a capoeira student. I don't know if from their school, from Explosion directly, or from another one, but it was just, for some reason, it wasn't a good look, and the tape disappeared. I never got it back. So I actually have 51, not 52, because I really wanted to. Actually, I remember when I wanted to find that tape, and I asked Jose about it. He was like, I don't know, dude, I thought I gave it back to you. Bunch of BS. And because I would have been edited into my highlight reel. Because you wouldn't even have to edit it. All you had to do was just play that. That would have been the whole clip of that knockout. So anyway, that's just another anecdote that's fun. You know, it's just me here reminiscing and bragging about it. But where I am today, and how I am, you know, I've trained martial arts in a very different way than a lot of people, because I realized something about athletic longevity, and I never really could understand why there were all these so-called martial arts masters, these sifus and senseis, who would later on in their life, like barely even like in their 40s, like 30s and 40s, would just start turning into these like, and I'm not even talking about people who were injured from like years of MMA, because MMA didn't even become popular until like maybe the late 80s, early 90s. That's why it was such a big thing for me entering that competition, because I was totally obsessed with UFC. I saw all the earlier ones, and I would go to the library, and I remember they had them on DVDs and cassette tapes, so I would just watch them over and over again. And I saw the super fights with Hoist Gracie, and, you know, and I saw Dan Severn, and, you know, all these guys like Tank Abbott, you know, all these guys from the early fights. That Kyokushin guy who I forget what his name meant. So many people, kickboxers, Smith. Like, I mean, it was just, I was obsessed with it, and I was also doing, you know, challenges out at parks with these Shotokan guys and beating these black belts in these parks in Oakland Park, and just and yeah, I mean, it was a wild time. It was just a really wild, like, when I think about this, it was just crazy, the stuff that I was doing in martial arts. But I couldn't understand these guys who, once again, weren't in like kumites or like Kyokushin battles. They were just these guys who were claiming to be these masters and having like fucking 10,000 Dan and like all this other nonsense and all these stripes in their belts. But then that would just become these little, you know, mountain golems and trolls getting on. I'm like, I don't understand this. Like, what are you doing? Like, and I just never thought I had this, still had a large part, and it's been a long time. Like, I've never really gotten over a lot of the mysticism in martial arts and metaphysics in general. I mean, I'm still at the tail end really maturing out of a lot of that, because there are a lot of things I've noticed that things in this world aren't all what it seems to be, and there's a lot more to our physical world than we realize, because I've also realized that the physical, the mental, and the spiritual are not separate. And I'm not going to get into that now, but it's had a very lasting impression on me about seeing that and the degradation of people, and realizing that it's not necessary, because I also have a lot of examples in my life from family members who have led completely different lives and have had completely different outcomes in their physical health. And so it wasn't lost on me that lifestyle and certain things can have an influence on how your health in the long term develops. And so the one thing that I learned was that I can be, practicing martial arts later in my life, but without falling victim to this stuff. And you look at a guy like Benny the Jet Uriquidez, for example, who another guy that I met, I think he's like either 5 or 7 time world kickboxing champion, Peter Cunningham, also goes by PD Cunningham. I met him in Florida, and he had a leg injury that for some reason, but he still kept fit. Even if he was kind of limping around, like he had some kind of leg injury to his hamstring that for some reason, I think he told me, he's like, he never really got it checked out the right way. So, it really did some permanent damage, it seemed. But yeah, I mean, like guys like that I had met and talked to, and, just like the real, the experience that they had, and like guys, like I said, like Benny the Jet, who you look at him and he's still, he's feisty. I think he's in his 70s now. And plus he was legendary. The things that you would see him do in the ring as a professional kickboxer, he is definitely a sight to behold. Benny the Jet. And so I knew that it was possible. I've always known that it's possible. And, I'm still doing the Hodapatafuso and backflips to this very day. Just today, I met with these 2 guys that I met at the beach, because I go and sit at the beach sometime and just watch the waves. And these 2 guys were out on the beach running and doing backflips, and I thought, this might be perfect to teach them and to share capoeira with them. So I went and recruited them, and that was a couple days ago. And then we met today at a park in Virginia Beach, and we had a good time going over some of the basics of capoeira. And I was doing the Hodapatafuso and flipping all around the place, and I feel amazing. And so, and like a website I started a year after my original website, which is hypnoathletics.com, which I use a subdomain eym.hypnoathletics.com. It's been online since March of 2006. So this month is the 20th year anniversary of hypnoathletics.com. And a year later, I put online a website called exercisingyourmind.com, which also I use a subdomain. I haven't really ever used the domain names proper for them, meaning I haven't used hypnoathletics.com or exercisingyourmind.com. It may be this year or some other time that I officially launched them, now that I've just had so much experience and learned a lot. But the point about that is that exercisingyourmind.com went online in 2007, and I had started off, I was talking about wealth attraction research, and then very quickly realized that great health is the truest of all wealth, because by that time I had been a few years into my career as a personal trainer and a group fitness instructor, which I worked at this gym, Bodies in Motion, for 9 years, from 2004 until I quit in 2013. And then very shortly after I quit, the whole place shut down, went out of business. And another coincidence, what's interesting there is that my first capoeira group that I trained with Mestre Pelé was called Corpo e Movimento, which means body and movement. And the gym I was working at, and also had capoeira classes at, was called Bodies in Motion. So not the same, but, you know, a fun little similarity, play on words. And so now the website Wealth Attraction Research said great health is the truest of all wealth. So I'd been into my career as a trainer then, and I realized I had people, some wealthy people, who were doing really great in their lives in so many ways, but were needing my help to do basic things. You know, just to be able to move and have basic mobility. And I'm 3 people are coming into my mind very specifically, and I'm not going to mention them, but I remember, you know, all of them were very well off, and just that part of their life was missing. And it's part of why I realized that definitely great health is the truest of all wealth, because you can enjoy so much more of your life and your money and your wealth and riches when your body serves you. And so, you know, those are some foundational things. And now I'm just going to end this because this has been an hour now, but I'm going to end this with the philosophy that I was talking about, how I really divided these sections of capoeira and what is now known as capoeira. And it's the dance, the game, and the martial art are distinct, but they're interconnected. And so the way that I look at the dance, because Jose and I had this unspoken rule where if we were in public doing capoeira, which we like to show off a lot because it was fun, we weren't trying to one-up each other. Now, it looked like we were combatants, but, or at least opponents, but the unspoken rule was we were going to do moves and cue each other in on things sometimes to help each other look good, not to knock each other around so that one of us look good, no, but both of us look good. So if some girls were seeing us play capoeira, they were like, oh man, wow, they're both amazing athletes. So that's how we would play. The whole thing about that part, the dance part of capoeira, was it was a cooperation and an interaction in which we were edifying each other, and it was an exhibition that we were playing this beautiful game, or this joga bonita, and the whole purpose of it was for us to have fun and play and move to the rhythm of the music and to show off. And so that's how I define the dance part of capoeira. It is a partnership in which you're cooperating and interacting in order to put on the best show so that it looks beautiful with the two players. The game part brings in competition, which invokes strategy and positioning. And as I was mentioning earlier about how I avoid completely as much as I can getting put on my butt and my back, is that I see the game, and I also, you know, I passed this by. I was talking to Mestre Parafina. I trained with his capoeira Los Angeles for a little while, and I ran this by him one time, and he said, yeah, that seems right to me. I don't remember exactly what the conversation was, but I said, look, the way that I see capoeira, this is my philosophy of it, is when you're playing the game, is that it's your objective as a player when you're competing and playing the game to be the one who has the most options, the most movement, and using the highest amount of skill and strategy to corner your opponent, basically get them into a position where they're vulnerable and they have the least amount of options of movement, so that with a well-timed sweep or a well-placed push or shove combined with a sweep or a placement of your foot, that they fall on their butt and or their back, and that's how you win the game or score points on them, by knocking them over, but without brute force, by using skill, by using finesse, because you've positioned yourself to have a superior position while making their position vulnerable, so that you don't need to use force. You find them in a position where they are in very compromised way where it doesn't take very much to knock them over. Very similar into a way when Sean Shigado tried to do the tesura on me, and I turned into him, and he got dumped hard. Now, I wasn't intending to. My intention was to stay on my feet and on my hands. It wasn't to dump him. But if I was playing that game for that purpose, that would have been a lure. Whatever position I put myself in where he saw that I was vulnerable for a scissor takedown, you could lure somebody in by being in that position and then just let them do the scissor, because maybe that's what they do. Maybe you can read them, and then you turn towards them, because that's how it works. If anybody ever does a scissor on you where they drop to their basically their body is sort of parallel to the floor, and if they're coming in from your right side, that means that their right leg will be behind both of your legs, with their right foot hooking around your left leg and your left heel and ankle area, and their left leg is going to be up above your knees, and so they're using counter revolutionary motion, where their right leg is sweeping forward while their left leg is pushing back, and they're turning their body in towards you. Now, the reason why this is vulnerable is because I didn't realize it until then, but because their back is to the floor and there's not a whole lot of balance or leverage, they don't have a whole lot of options there. So when I turned into him, turning into my right, remember, so if this is a person attacking with a tesura or a scissor sweep from your right, with their right leg behind your legs and their left leg in front, and they're twisting to pull you down that way, if you turn towards them and you fall forward so that your hands fall on the ground, you're essentially landing on top of them and dumping them hard on their body, because they're already twisting into you in that direction. And if you just turn in that direction and fall, you fall right on top of them. And so that's what happened. I fell on top of him, but then I didn't stay there. I immediately kept on moving. Like, I think I cartwheeled off out of the way and then rolled out of the way. But it was just pretty incredible. But that's part of the strategy, that if you are luring somebody in, that's the whole thing, is that you get them in a vulnerable position. He put himself in a vulnerable position by attempting that move. It might not have seemed like it, but it is a vulnerable move. I actually don't even like it, and I realized later why that happened, because it's just a stupid move. It's not a stupid move in a street fight or in a competition where you can do that to knock somebody over and you don't care about falling on your butt, your back. But it's stupid in a game where points can get scored like that. So I should be clear about that. Like, it's dumb, like, from that perspective. It might be street fight, self-defense, or even in a competition effective, but not in capoeira. Like, to me, that's all I'm saying. And so then the combat aspect that leads to self-defense is a combination of that interactive, cooperative, rhythmic, dance-like, playful partnership that you have in the dance of capoeira, combined with the strategic positioning and skillful timing of the game, where you're attempting to knock somebody on their butt and their back, and you put those two things together, and then on top of that you layer in anything goes. It doesn't matter. Any punches, kicks, headbutts, bumps, sweeps, throws, holds, slams, environmental things you can pick up and hit people with, anything goes. But from that base of that full body awareness that you get from playing capoeira, from doing the cartwheels and the backflips and the spins and the rolls and the handstands and the kicks and all of that stuff, is for body awareness and to build up endurance and strength in your body. All of that stuff doesn't get used in a fight. A lot of it's too flashy and too flowery and has no place in a fight. But the body awareness that you have, that you get from that, is beneficial. And you need to be very intentional about how you're applying those things and in what situation. When you're dancing, you're a partnership. Flowery, doesn't matter. You can do that badly organized circus where both of you are just flipping around and flying through the air and kicking at each other for the fun of it, because it looks good, right? It's flashy, it's a show, it's an exhibition. The game, you can do some of those things only if you know what you're doing, if you're using it to lure somebody in and set them up and make them think you're vulnerable. And then you also have a lot of the strategy and the timing and everything that you use in there as well. And then when it's a combat situation, you pull out all the stops. It doesn't matter. I mean, even in the combat situation, in the combat application that I use of my capoeira, right? I've incorporated rolls. So like forward rolls where you literally roll across your back forward, roll backward, roll right, roll left. Like that's completely not something that you do in capoeira. It's like rolling on the ground, like letting your body roll on the ground. But in a combat, in a fight situation, those rolls, sometimes they're called combat rolls, those are very effective. And so that's a thing there. And, and I remember one interesting thing happened. There was a guy that I met, was an on and off trainer of kickboxing in Bodies in Motion in California, and he went on to do a couple MMA fights, and his name is Matt, and he trained with this guy named David Gondrez, who was a black belt from, I think, the Machado Jiu-Jitsu guys. And he was either a blue or a purple belt, I don't remember, it doesn't matter, but I'd never done Jiu-Jitsu before. And so him and I went to a couple, I think like no more than a handful of like the sessions, because David Gondrez was giving free sessions in the gym, in the ring. And I went to, a handful of them. I definitely know it was no more than 5. I didn't go a lot. But there was one time when I met with Matt, and we decided to roll. And we were rolling, and I remember the first time we rolled, it was like 30 minutes before he could get me into an arm bar on my left arm, and then I had to submit. But 30 minutes we were rolling. And, props to Matt. He wasn't that much of an advanced jiu-jitsu player. I don't know what you call him. Like I said, blue or purple belt. But, for somebody who hadn't ever done jiu-jitsu before, and we were just rolling around, it took him 30 minutes before he can get me into an arm bar. Now, there's also some other objective evidence about the fact that my capoeira and other movements were effective. Again, I didn't have zero experience rolling, right? I was on the high school wrestling team in my senior year, and I did really well in high school wrestling. And then I did that hardcore King of the Ring thing where there was some wrestling involved as well, and submissions. And so by the time I was with Matt in the ring, I had a lot of different ways to move my body. I was used to being upside down, sideways, all kind of stuff, so I was able to roll and maneuver around. And I do remember David Gondrez once asking me, he's like, hey, how did you why is it that you move like that? And I told him it was because of capoeira. And he says, that's interesting. He thought that it was like that must explain it. It's like, because you seem to be so comfortable in like all these different dimensions of positions, which is why you're able to sneak out and roll out and do things that are like high level advanced ways that I teach my jiu-jitsu students how to change their body so that they don't get in these compromising situations. And that's how it was explained to me. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense to me. At least the way he explained it to me. And he is at a high level, so he would know. And so there is a certain way that you use your intention and the way that you apply the things, and they have different dimensions. And there's a dance, there's a game, and there's a fight. And those are the dimensions that I know of capoeira, and what I have made very clear distinctions of, and how they interact with each other in capoeira. And that's what sets me apart, is that I've done the full spectrum, which this is not a negative mark on people. Some people don't want to fight ever. There are people who just go box or kickbox or do jiu-jitsu just because they want to learn to be healthy, and maybe some self-defense, but they don't intentionally put themselves in competition. I've done all of it. I've played capoeira games and focus on the dance and the flowery part, the joga bonita. I've played capoeira games competitively against people to knock them over and put them on their butt, and that's one of my fortes. And I have used capoeira in the ring and in, unfortunately, a handful of street fights, and I was a street fighter before that. And so I've got a full spectrum of experience of how I've applied. And so that is what informs capoeira. And I'm not a traditionalist in the sense that a lot of people are doing it. I have a very broken lineage I've trained with various different people in various different martial arts systems. I can't claim any of them, except maybe Capoeira Mandinga in China. I'm really cool with them, and they gave me my first cord. So I don't know, which I don't even know where that is, by the way. And so I don't have any lineage, any school, so I've started my own, and I have my own approach to it. And that approach is in sharing those three different modes of capoeira, and sometimes they blend into each other, but mostly the dance and the game blend into each other more than the martial arts part. Although the martial arts part more you'll get from learning how to effectively do kicks, escapes, sweeps. You know, if you learn how to strike properly and how to move your body, you're better off than somebody who doesn't. But there comes a time when you have to actually spar, and you have to actually learn how to hit and get hit, or at least avoid getting hit, because there's no way around that reality of combat. But that combination of that understanding and those delineations of how I share it, and the approach is more like how friends get together to ball on a basketball court, or just kick around a soccer ball, or so shooting hoops. People get together, they're just not trying to be a hierarchy. They're just want to play the game, and that's really, to me, what it's all about. I'm so glad that my wealth attraction research was to uncover and demonstrate that great health is the truest of all wealth, and that my foundation for movement has been capoeira as a framework and a structure to build all of these other things on, whether they come from Muay Thai or boxing or submissions and grappling and all the other things that I've done with this system. And the fact that my athletic longevity has been a goal, and that I am 49 years old this year in September of 2026. And I'm still doing backflips and spinning around through the air 540 degrees and doing 5-minute rounds on the heavy bag. And yes, I pace myself because I'm not trying to burn all out, but I can go that distance by being very aware of my body systems. And it's just an amazing feeling to still be able to do these things. This is now 34 years later, and I'm extremely fit. I've got my nutrition dialed in, my daily movement dialed in, my rest dialed in. Meditation, breathing exercises. I've really achieved this high level and continually evolving state of physical expression, to the point where I'm able to just to move around and teach guys who are in their early 20s and flip and jump around in a very childlike way, because I have full control of my body. It's amazing. And that's also a huge part of my system of capoeira, It's not just the movement. It's not just the fighting. I'm not the best fighter in the world. I can't claim that I'm going to go into the ring and beat up all the MMA fighters or anything like that. That's not the point. But I'm not a pushover either. I've had enough experience in the ring, in the streets, in all kinds of situations for 34 years strong, and to the point where my body has preserved itself to still be able to move the way that I do for this long. It's really, to me, I've proven it to myself. And I finally got to this point where, yes, I'm now going to share this in a much broader sense now with people, because I have this high level of vitality, and I just love doing it. Like, the whole idea of jumping around and moving around doing capoeira movements, I mean, I do it when I don't have anybody to do it with. I've been playing capoeira and doing capoeira movements basically as a dance and as a form of physical expression by myself for years and years and years, and I use it, variants and movements from it, on the heavy bag when I'm doing my 5-minute rounds, or I just go into a room and put on music and then just start doing it. It's just a form of expression, and it just feels really good. And to be able to do that, I mean, I feel like people have lost that, which is one of the reasons why, I mean, I can go on and get philosophical. Again, I was saying I was going to stop this, 20 minutes ago, but it's just the point that I am now. There's no has been, right? I'm still in the thick of it. That's what's really great about it. I'm not just talking about things from the past. Like, I'm still at the top of my game. I'm like hyper agile and mobile and flexible and endurant and strong. And fast. It's crazy to think about it. Only when there's a juxtaposition, when there's a comparison, which is why I realize I've stumbled onto something, because I'm not a superhuman. I'm not a mutant. I've just done things in a certain way to maintain this level of physicality. And it's the way that I've approached martial arts and just movement in general. I mean, because I'm not a martial artist alone. I'm also a musician and a metaphysician. Or I like to use the word metaphysicist. Because, I lean to the physics side of things. But that's my wheelhouse. That's my other triad, is martial arts, music, metaphysics. I've got the philosophy, the art, and this other form of physical expression. Like, it's a really great place to be. And I am grateful for it. I'm going to keep doing it for as long as I can, because I know that nothing's forever. Eventually, I'm either going to die soon here. I could be the next couple seconds, or the next few, or next couple decades. You never know. And so I'm just continuing to make the most of the fact that I have full control over my body. And I'm able to move the way that I am. And it's given me some interesting revelations about having that ability, and why I feel the way that I do, and why it's such a great wealth, why it's actually a wealth flex to be able to do these things, because people want me to share it with them, of all ages, because they're just like, how do you move like that? How is your body like that? Like, how does that happen? And it's something that I've now had to continue to systematize and build a structure for it to be able to share it. And there's so much. But I've laid that framework of the differences between the dance being an an edification partnership of a beautiful exhibition, the game being a competition that uses strategic positioning to outmaneuver your opponent and to knock them down with elegance and grace, and not using brute force, and the combat applications of it, which is putting those things together and anything else you have in your arsenal that you can deliver to your enemy and inflict the most damage while sustaining little to none yourself and being able to escape from a situation or to prevail in the situation that you're in. It's as simple as that. And again, 20th anniversary of hypnoathletics.com, where my saying was, and this is all part of it, all the things that I do, dream action yoga, exposing the conditioned personality, hypnoathletics, physio meditation, capoeira, the only war to wage is within, come from hypnoathletics, which says the one full part of my statement, my mission statement is hypnoathletics is exercising your mind towards universal harmony and spiritual wisdom through healthy living and self-defense. So you could say that the self-defense part of hypnoathletics is capoeira. The healthy living branch could be physio meditation, which encompasses dream action yoga and other things like what I call contrology oriented mat Pilates. I love the acronyms. And contrology was one of the names of Pilates. Universal harmony and spiritual wisdom, that's my metaphysical practice, which is, I call the Institute of Metaphysical Hypnosis, and on and on and on. There's so many different little intellectual properties that I've created. Like I have these things called Fury, Fuse, and Fate, or Rasta, R-A-S-T-A, which they're all part of the religion, art, and science triangle. So Fury is the foundation for united religious yearning. Fuse is the foundation for universal scientific exploration, and Fate is the foundation for artistic talent expression. I mean, again, this is why these things, when I've taken this amount of time to express these ideas, because for years I've been developing them. There's no end to this. It's an ever evolving, ongoing, always a work in progress. There are endpoints to certain projects that have a definitive beginning and end. Like, for example, the simplest thing is in creating a name for something, like the religion, art, and science triangle, and having Fury, Fuse, and Fate be the ways that I have named those three parts of the triangle. Or even the fact that I say that I'm a musician, martial artist, and metaphysicist, right? And if I wanted to map those things on there, I could say that in the religion, art, and science triangle, that metaphysics is Fury, the foundation for united religious yearning. Fuse, the foundation for universal scientific exploration, could be the music part, and there are reasons for that. Music is actually on the quadrivium, with number being the base, and then number in space being geometry, number in time being music, and number in space-time is astronomy or cosmology. And so, and then in Fate, the foundation for, I actually mixed that up a little bit, which now that I'm thinking about it could actually be better. Fuse, the foundation for universal scientific exploration, be the martial arts part, because that involves physiology, biology, nutrition, chemistry, all that stuff, right? And then the foundation for artistic talent expression is where the musician part goes in there. So yeah, I haven't really thought about that too much, but that's an appropriate mapping of those things. They come in all these threes. It's like how, capoeira, dance, game, martial art. Yeah. I'm going to think about this a little bit more and map these things over each other. It's just kind of fun, but there's no set thing to it. It's not definitive. It's just a way to talk about and discuss and put things into categories to be able to share them with people more easily. So That's what this is. And we're at 90 minutes, so we are done. This has been one of my inaugural podcasts for the official Capoeira podcast. I am Hakeem Ali-Bocas Alexander.